Good morning, respected professors, faculty members, and other dignitaries, and my dear friends. First of all, I would like to thank my faculty members and the management of AMIT for giving me an opportunity to take part in the 6th annual conference. Today, I will be presenting about the impact of COVID 19 on supply chain management on a global perspective. Being a supply chain management professional, I have been monitoring and studying and doing research on various implications and impacts on supply chain management from various industries. So, on March 11th, 2020, when the World Health Organization chief declared COVID 19 as a global pandemic, we did not expect that it would have a much larger implication, a much larger effect on the supply chain management or the logistic perspective for different industries. But for surprisingly, we could see that the companies shifted their strategies, shifted their goals and missions and visions within a span of a short span of time in order to achieve their targets and in order to achieve their market share which they had designed much before. So this shift and their redesigning of their global goals have been discussed in my presentation. Can you ever imagine when you go to a big bazaar in Mangalore city or Reliance outlet in Mangalore city that was just stock out? The shelves are stock out? Never, right? In India, we didn't have such a pathetic situation. But in Canada and USA, we did have that situation. Why is this? Because I can give you a very good example. Till 2019 or 2020, we had a good manufacturing practice, that is, consumption or a global free trade. That is, the global or the countries internationally, the countries who are much economically developed, they opened their borders to get the raw materials and they process it and they make it a finished goods and they export it to less economically developed countries, and through that they become more powerful. So the supply chain management or the logistics is dependent upon a country which is in Asia or Africa. But never imagined a pandemic like this would affect the manufacturing operations. I remember when I was working as a vendor management senior associate for a leading footwear company way back in India in 2017 to 2019. There was a sorry, there was a close down of manufacturing facilities in Delhi and the vicinity of Delhi due to the high pollution rate during the December months. Due to the situation, we had to rethink our strategies or we had to source our suppliers towards the south because our manufacturing facility is in the south. Therefore, we could not rely much on the suppliers in the north, because due to which the shutdown of the leather factories or the Rexon factories in the north for 3 to 4 weeks would have a serious impact on our company and our production facility for more than 2 months to 3 months. So a small shutdown from our supplier could have a larger impact on our productivity for or from our manufacturing facility, which could last thrice or 4 times or 5 times than the span of time which we could imagine. So already a situation like this existed, but this did not get magnified until a pandemic or a COVID situation came into the surface. So this is how the companies learned how to strategize, how to redesign their production operations, their logistics services. Coming into the traditional manufacturing practices, as I already told, the economically developed countries' manufacturing facilities used to take the raw materials and semi-finished products from a less economically developed or countries like from the Asia or Africa, and they used to gain a good amount of foreign exchange. But there were some implications or there were some problems existed that came into surface when the COVID-19 came into the picture. Now, when we discuss about the global economic activity, um, as I already mentioned, the international free trade was one of the major tool that made the companies and the countries to have or to rely on the products or the raw materials from other countries. But in India, the picture was different. In India, we had much of the companies or much of the industries relied on the products or the raw materials that was sourced either from China or from the Bangladesh or from our country itself. We did not have much imports coming from USA or much imports coming from the Africa because our raw material or our natural resources were much strong. But this was not the case for the North American continents like Canada or USA. Here, the climate and the weather condition is different, so we are relying much on the Asian and African countries for the raw materials and the other natural resources. Hence, what was the serious impact after the COVID 19 for the North American companies when in the logistics perspective? First thing is the shipping cost. To ship a container from Asia to USA, average a container the as per the global container freight index says the it was in 2019 it was around like 1362 US dollars, but after the COVID-19 it just rose up to 9,000, between a range of 9,000 to 11,000 US dollars. So that was a tremendous increase to the cost, which was adding a cost towards the company. And therefore, the companies which were relying much on China for sourcing their raw materials, they had to shift their sourcing suppliers towards Canada, towards USA and Mexico. That is, a US company used to source much of its products either from Canada or Mexico in order to save on the freight cost and the shipping cost. But the problems did not end there because it was not so rapidly it was possible, because we need to find a supplier, we need to train them, and we need to have much logistical support within these three countries. So when the countries from China, when the containers coming from Asia or Africa, when the container arrive in US continent, the small SMEs or the farmers who used to procure from these companies or these countries did not have much of their products, or the exporters did not have much of their products to fill the containers and send it back towards that country. So this was one of the main hindrances that added the shipping cost for the shipping companies when shipping the logistics shipments into the North American continents. So the shipping cost hike was a serious implication for after the COVID-19 on supply chain management. Now, the crisis in North American labor market. In North American labor market was much very badly hit by the COVID-19 situations or the pandemic. Why? Because we have a very little. I think so. In Canada, we have the major port is in Vancouver. So in Vancouver, if a ship has to come to the port and dock and unload the containers after the COVID-19, it took around 2 to 4 weeks to clear the ship or to clear the port. And after 4 weeks of lying over in the port, the weather has to be good in order to ship that container way back to Toronto or to Edmonton or to any other province. Same in the case of USA too. Why this is because of less number of dock workers or the port laborers in US or Canada. As the COVID-19 hit very badly in these countries, the number of workers who quit their job was so high, and the number of people who joined or who wanted to apply for these jobs were very less, because and the number of container ships coming into these countries increased. Adding to it, the weather conditions, especially in the winter, it was so bad that the ships coming to these continents could not even have a chance to anchor them into the ports and get a chance to offload them. So all these created a negative scenario or a negative situations and circumstances towards the COVID-19 supply chain management cases. And this added towards the cost of shipping and cost of operational cost for these companies. Another factor which I would like to discuss about the labor market in North American continents is the trucking industry, because same like the rail, the trucks play a vital role between the Canada, US, and Mexico borders, because uh, we know the number of ports in these continents is very less. So only the trucks can go into different province in order to supply with necessary groceries and all the products that improves the and also the manufacturing raw materials. And manufacturing raw materials in the sense, in each province there are enormous amount of factories which is established, and that has manufacturing facilities that used to source different types of raw materials from different parts of the world. So truck was a vital player in supplying or in distributing all these supplies towards these factories. As per the latest data, which says in 2021 there were 20,000 vacant truck driver positions in Canada and USA. And in US and Canada now it has been rose about 80,000 truck drivers shortage. Why there was a high demand for truck drivers, especially during this pandemic situation? Because when the pandemic started, there were much policies implemented by government in order to restrict the truck drivers in using the toilet facilities and the restaurant facilities, that made this profession or this job very hard for the existing labor force. So many of the truckers, they had to quit their job, which increased the shipping cost and which increased the demand for the trucks that were servicing in these countries. So coming towards a new redesigned production pattern which was adopted by the new companies. That is, as I always used to say in my previous lectures, the lean manufacturing. The lean manufacturing was a concept which was devised or first implemented by Japanese companies, especially by Toyota. But during the pandemic situation or pandemic time, the lean manufacturing was much emphasized by the companies because they were able to rely on complicated algorithms to understand which SKUs or which type of product line was much in demand during which time of the year. So at that point of time, they could source and they could purchase and they could store the products. Based upon that, they could save an enormous amount of money in terms of warehousing cost, in terms of transportation cost, and in terms of the purchasing. So this is how the lean manufacturing took a new phase in the new production pattern after the COVID 19 came. And when discussing about the lean manufacturing techniques, we should also say about the lean manufacturing technique also comes with other techniques called Kaizen, as well as the 5S, and also the quality techniques, the quality management principles. So when the companies rely on a very slight profit margin, they were forced to adopt the lean management techniques in order to have a better working capital, and in order to have a better advantage, in order to have a good profit share on, or in order to pump much higher dividend towards the shareholders. This is how the board of directors had to consult new management consultants who were much more experts in implementing lean techniques throughout the company structure. The economic implications of supply chain disruption. So, when discussing about all this, the economic implication is that the freight rates increased, obviously, and the labor shortages, it was also evident. And when all this came towards the highest peak, there were also the food insecurity and the climate crisis and the global health pandemic states. I remember in last year when the Omicron started, we had Canada had very serious weather conditions, very bad weather conditions, especially during in the British Columbia where the port existed. So even though my company had to source some of our much of our containers come from Japan, our containers used to come to the port at British Columbia, but the goods train which used to take the containers from British Columbia to Toronto, it was not available because there were heavy rainfall and adding to it landslides. So due to which the railway lines were blocked, and because of which our containers got stuck up. So it took around 90 to 120 days in order to get one container from Japan to Toronto, which was previously it was 30 days. So weather conditions, higher shipping cost, and the labor shortage, everything added, everything was so bad after the COVID-19, which made the companies to redesign their strategies, either to cut down the product lines in order to make or concentrate on those product lines or those SKUs which was much more profitable and which used to have a much turnaround. The turnaround time was very less, and that used to reach the customers very easily. So that was one strategy which companies adopted, that is to reduce the product line and to concentrate on those SKUs that used to generate much more cash within less period of time. Now, I take three companies into examples. That is, I take from three different industries how they overcome the COVID 19 pandemic situation with more focus on technology and their operational strategies. First is I am taking the example of Maersk, the major player in shipping industry or the transportation industry. Maersk came up with the idea of a software called Maersk Flow. So Maersk Flow is like, for example, I can take the example of the Ideal ice cream in Mangalore. So Ideal ice cream, they have their raw material is from maybe the milk and the milk products. Obviously, they can source it from the Nandini Milk Union, that is from Nandini Milk depots. They can source it. But what about the Nandini suppliers? Are these suppliers well established in order to supply a regular supply towards the Nandini, and yes, Nandini is able to supply to the Ideal ice cream so that I will be able to play a major role in my market? If I go behind my competitors like Amul, or my competitors like Quality or Walls, all this can take over my market share. So I need to be in such a position that I need to have a better visibility on my supplier's supplier. So Maersk Flow is a software designed by Maersk in order to have a better control over your supplier's supplier. Indirectly, the Maersk Flow suggests you need to have, as a buyer, you need to have multiple suppliers, and as a supplier, you need to have multiple buyers. And the logic is very easy. So if you are a buyer, in order to have a multiple suppliers, you need to have a different portfolios. And in order to have a different portfolio, you will be having, your system will be generating different purchase orders. And your purchase orders, the lead time and the time and the inventory on hand, everything comes into picture. So the software has a better idea on how much inventory you have, how much lead time your supplier needs to get, and the lead time for supplier need to get. Everything will come into picture. So the critical points will be matched, your critical points will be measured, and based upon the critical points, your software will trigger at what time, at what amount of time you need to purchase, and at what cost you need to purchase. And if the system does not allow you much flexibility, again you need to redesign or rethink about another way of procurement. Maybe locally you need to have trained suppliers that can supply you throughout the year in spite of having whatever situation prevails. So that is how the Maersk Flow exists or works. Now I take the example from our next industry, from the food industry, that is Nestle. Nestle, we all know the Maggi 2-minute noodles or the Kit Kat. So the Nestle's first strategy when they were hit by the COVID-19 was to have inventory at all levels, at the raw material level, at the semi-finished level, at the finished product level. So at the raw material level, they will be having a less value addition. The semi-finished level, they will be having a much more value addition, and the finished level, they will be having a higher value addition. So based upon the value addition, the cost increases. So they designed in such a way that the working capital should match, as well as they should not sacrifice on the inventory levels. Even if they sacrifice on the inventory levels, the customers should not get affected. So they played, or they devised such a strategy or algorithm to design or to make available, or to, without disrupting the production and without disrupting the flow towards the market. So this was something which they had done with stocking based upon the inventory level, stocking based upon the value addition of each product level of each category. So that is how they ensured that even if something happens at one level, they have a safety stock at the higher level. So they could take up that level inventory and supply to the market, and the safety stock in the next level, or the lead time, within the lead time, they could source towards the market until the lead time, until the product comes into their hand. So that is how Nestle worked out. Also, they had, wherever possible, they substituted the menus. Even if I am if in a food industry, if I could substitute one type of product with any substitute which is easily available in my vicinity, that is a better option. And if the cost is affordable, there I can have a competitive advantage. So indirectly they are speaking about having a supplier within your vicinity, and ensure that substitutes could be found out, having a team of good professionals in your hand. Again, they also made sure their shelves at different retailers were never empty, and that is by they are having a good amount of inventory at different distribution centers, at different warehouses, and at different manufacturing facilities. Their inventory levels they redesigned, their lead time towards the market. They redesigned because they took into account the implications of shipping cost and the implications of higher freight charges. So that is how being proactive rather than being reactive. At last, the major company which I'm taking is the top company of the Fortune 500, which is none other than Walmart. How Walmart was able to have a competitive advantage or could stand in on top of other companies during the pandemic is very simple, because they had their major revenue share is from the grocery section. So how they were able to find, how they were able to take advantages, because they afforded or they had to bear the transportation cost towards the local producers or the farmers, where the farmers found it very difficult to afford a truck. As you know, as I already mentioned, truckers were very less, and the trucking companies were very less during the pandemic time. So Walmart hired about 3,000 truck drivers, and they added a new fleet into their group, and they had their own truck, and they used to send it towards their local suppliers, and they used to bear the cost for transporting their own groceries. They used to even charter the ships from different countries in order to get their products delivered towards their site in US or Canada. So that means they use, even if the ports are congested, they used to reroute the ports towards other less congested ports in US or Canada, and after the containers got offloaded into the ports, they took up a policy of the non-conventional routes on the road, where the truckers could easily get through their warehouse and distribution centers and reduce the lead time. So that is how they worked out. And high investments on automation, their distribution centers, their warehouses, they rely less on human capital or human manpower, because during the COVID time, they were unsure about who used to fall sick. So much more robotics and automation were deployed, and they invested into much research, um, they pumped much of the money into research and development of automation into their supply chain management network. And also, finally, they focused on local suppliers. Rather than shifting towards the traditional production pattern, like sourcing the products from Asian or African countries, they started thinking about the local suppliers, sourcing from the local vendors. So that's how they had better control, better visibility about their supplier and their supplier's supplier. So this is how the North American continents, they overcome the COVID-19 situation, and still we are trying so hard in order to come back, and in order to have a better competitive advantage, even in during the high time of the inflation, and even after the US Ukraine war is still going on. So still the companies are doing much appreciable activities again here in terms of supply chain and logistic activities. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to present my views about my research, and thank you and have a great day.